Brennan Coates here, author, speaker, educator, and I'm in front of the whiteboard because I promised you I'm going to be sharing why the brains of the cell are not inside the nucleus. They're actually outside the cell or around the cell within the cell membrane. But first, let's do a quick little anatomy cell 101. Alright, so really quick, as you can see, this is a very basic diagram of a cell. That is the cell membrane. Within there is the endoplasmic reticulum. That's largely responsible for the synthesis of proteins. That is another diagram of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. There are some ribosomes on there. That basically has little pieces of RNA on it. So when cells replicate, there's little pieces of RNA still on those ribosomes that get transferred over to the next cell. And there's the mitochondria. You may have heard that before. That is the powerhouse of the cell. I remember when I was first starting biology, I thought that there was only one mitochondria per cell. Lo and behold, there's up to hundreds of thousands of mitochondria per cell. And there's the nucleus. And inside that nucleus, people thought that that's where the brains of the cell is. Why is that? Well, inside the nucleus there is this. What is that? DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid. And we've all been taught that when cells replicate, they essentially split, and a portion of that DNA gets carried on to the next brand new baby cell, and it's got RNA. Right? That all makes sense to us. And so they thought that, within these, DNA sequences, the genes, they've got all of our information, right? And that's true. But they are responsive to something. It's called epigenetics. They're responsive to our environment. So I'm kind of go backward a little bit, but DNA, we've heard that it's called the blueprint of the cell. And that's true. So how can someone design a blueprint, right? So think of this. Let me give you an example. If you are an architect and you are designing a beautiful new building, okay? The blueprints, you've got to come up with the blueprints in order for the structure to be built according to what? Its environment. So if you were to build, let's say, a high-rise in Japan on a fault line, it would be a heck of a lot different than building it here in Toronto. The ground is different. The environment is different. The winds are different, right? The foundation is going to be different. Knowing that it's on a fault line, it's probable to earthquakes, right? So those blueprints are going to be based on the environment that it's going to be built. And that's the same with the human body. It's called epigenetics. And if you're familiar with Dr. Linus Pauling, he's the one that really discovered this. So how does the brains of the cell really kind of dictate how the DNA gets sequenced or how these genes get turned on or off? Well, it's not from the DNA. The DNA is responsive to the environment, and this is how. So I'm going to draw really quick. This is like the cell lining right here, and it's kind of like a double wall in a way. It's called a lipid bilayer, right? So you've got here, here, and these are all cool little legs, and they go this way, right? So that's the wall of the cell right here, right? This part here, it's right there. And within that whole cellular wall, there's receptor sites. Let's use maybe a different color. There's receptor sites located all around the outside, right here. Kind of like a key and lock, right? Key and lock. Within the cell, kind of like, easy to give you an example, would be how insulin binds to glucose, right? So there's floating around blood sugar, insulin binds to glucose, and then boom, drives it, delivers it right on these receptor sites. The receptor sites open up, and then the insulin goes with the glucose into the cell right there, for cell utilization, right? The mitochondria, everything starts to use up that energy, that glucose. So here's the thing. The environment that's outside the cell and inside the cell dictate how the cell's health is going to be. Again, epigenetics. There's one study that I saw that genetics only plays almost like a 7 to 10%, not even 10%, like 7 to 10% probability that you will develop any type of conditions that your genes are flipped on or off for. So let's say you've got a cancer gene and it's turned on. Just because it's on does not mean that you're destined to get, let's say, prostate cancer because that gene is flipped on. It will respond according to the environment. So if you don't have an acidic state in your body, if you don't have a lot of stress, if you don't have high cortisol, if you don't have toxic overload, if you don't have elevated blood sugar, all of those things, then the cell will respond and be healthy accordingly. But if you don't have a healthy cell, if it's very, very acidic, you've got a huge toxic load, you've got hormones all over the place, you've got heavy metals, you've got pesticides, but you've got parasites and candida, then all of these cells are going to be responsive to the environment. Make sense? So what's so cool is that the cell membrane actually has all these types of receptor sites, and they've got these really cool chemical sequences that respond accordingly to what binds to these receptor sites. And then within the cell, inside the cell, they release so many sequences of different types of hormones and chemicals and so forth as a response to what's outside the cell. In turn, these chemicals that are released inside the cell, they then tell the DNA what to do, how to act according to its environment. Ta-da! How cool is that? So, no, the brains of the cell is not the DNA. It is not the nucleus. It's not the RNA. And it's not the DNA. The true brains of the cell is the cell membrane. It's going to tell the cell what to do, how to work based on its environment. Now you know.